All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tilsa Mishpacha Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shimon Drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan Haba Alim Latova, Stephen Terry Zin, in loving memory of Steve's mother, Doris Zin, Devora Bas Rabbi Shmuel Silber, Levrach, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Matt and Diane Marks, in memory of Diane's mother, Pesha Bas Binyamin Zichron Levrach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all those who need a refuah, should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shlem Yirtz Hashem. Bring home our hostages, B'Shalom and B'Karav, and allow our holy soldiers and land and sea in the air, and Meretz Hashem to be successful against our enemies, and we should be Zochem Meretz Hashem to a decisive victory for Klal Yisrael and Meretz Hashem, Beracha, Hatzlacha, and Shalom for our people and for our land. Moshe, with that, let us begin Shechiyanu V'Kimanu V'Gyanu Lazman Hazeh to our last daf in Meseches Shevuos. So today's daf is Memtes. We are picking up, we've got a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Memtes 49. We are picking up on Memches Mabez 48b. And let's actually pick up the line before the lines get wide. Actually, two lines before the lines get wide. We actually read this yesterday, but we read it quickly. So let's just go back and revisit it again. So let's remember again, just very quick. We are in the midst, embroiled, enmeshed, literally up to our necks in a machlokes in Rav and Shmuel, I should say Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Lazar. What's the case? Very simple. Yaakov lends money to Zvulun, right? What occurs? So remember, the Mishnah said that if they die and their orphans want to collect from each other, and Yaakov's orphans want to collect from Zvulun's orphans, so the halacha is they need a shvuah. What's the shvuah that the Mishnah is referring to? It's what's called shvuas hayarshin. Shvuas hayarshin essentially says, we swear, the children of Yaakov say, we swear that as far as we know, our father never indicated to us that this loan has been repaid. And as a result, halacha l'maisa, we are here to collect the debt of our father. Good. So then Gemara explains, so we had an interesting machlokes over here in the following scenario. What occurs if, Rav and Shmuel say that is true when? That is true when the malveh predeceases the loveh. But if the borrower predeceased the lender, then here's the issue. That means already when Yaakov the lender was alive, he was chayv shvuah to Zvulun's heirs, because remember again, you can't collect from someone without a shvuah. When Yaakov subsequently dies, Rav and Shmuel say that loan becomes uncollectible. Why? Because Yaakov is already chayv shvuah, and a shvuah cannot be passed down from a father to his children. Therefore, the loan remains uncollectible. Rabbi Lazar says, incorrect, I disagree. Although the children can't take the shvuah of the father, that's true, but halacha l'maisa, they can take a shvuah sayarshim. Let them take a shvuah sayarshim, shalom al Yisrael, and they can collect the debt. So we'll say that's our machlokes. See, here we go. Iklu Rav Nachman the surah. So Rav Nachman went to the surah, Ula Gabei Rav Chisda Rav Bar Afuna. So Rav Chisda Rav Bar Afuna came to visit him. Amrulay, they said to Rav Nachman, Le'seimar na'akr lahad Rav Shmuel. Okay, Rebbe, you're here. Rav Nachman, you're here. Can you finally uproot this ruling of Rav and Shmuel? So Amr lahu. So Rav Nachman said, Chevra, Iqbali va'asai kol hani parsai le'akr lahad Rav Shmuel. Do you think I traveled all of this way to uproot the rulings of Rav and Shmuel? So Ella havu dulo losif Allah. So Rav Nachman said, look, we're not going to be able to uproot the halachos, this psak of Rav and Shmuel. Why? Because it's already embedded. What we can do is create a non-proliferation of this particular halacha. So what we could say is, whatever the cases we've already applied it to, we'll apply it to. We're not going to extrapolate it and apply it to any other cases. Okay, the Gemara says, Kigon Mai. What's an example of an additional case that we wouldn't apply it to? So the Gemara says, Kigon Mai. Do Amra Papa, Hapogim Eshtaro. So let's just remember again, Pogim Eshtaro, we've seen this case before. This is a person who claims partial payment of their debt, right? So Ruben owes me money. I claim that I already received, he owes me $1,000. I admit I received $100 for it. The problem is once you do that, that blunts the effectiveness of the shtar, because I'm already admitting that what's said in the shtar ultimately, again, is not fully accurate, fully presently accurate. So Apogim Shtara Umeis, and then again, let's just go with Yaakov. Let's go with Yaakov and Zvulun again. So what happens? Yaakov admits that $100 of the debt was paid, and then Yaakov died. Yarshit Nishba in Shevuos Yarshav and Otlin. Ultimately, again, the children are able to go ahead and swear Shevuos Yarshim, and they're able to collect the rest of it. In other words, so we would apply that. So in other words, we wouldn't say that since there may have been a pre-existing Shvuah that Allah the Yarshim can't collect. Rather, the Yarshim swear their own Shevuos Yarshim they could collect. Good. Hod Shachiv v'Shavak Arva. So it's an interesting case over here. There was a guy who died, and he left behind the guarantor. He had a guarantor for his repayment. So Papa wanted to say, here everyone agree that we don't pass like Rav and Shmuel, because this would be like adding on an additional case. To which the Gemara says, I'm sorry. Good. Savra Papa Lemar, Hanami de Losif Allah. So the Gemara says, Who Amar Le Rafun Papa. Atu arva lav basar yasmi azil. Not true, because again, if the guarantor, who is the guarantor going after? At the end of the day, even if the guarantor repays the debt, who is he going to afterwards? Right? Halacha l'maisa, he's going to go ahead and says. So the Gemara says, "Who Amar Le? I'm still civil Allah. Amar Le Rava Mali Shalo Pakadni Abba Mali Shalo Pakadni Achi." Not true. Again, at the end of the day, a Yorish is a Yorish is a Yorish. What does it matter again if at the end of the day if it's kids or at the end of the day it's a brother? Good. Amar Chama. So we'll say, so therefore, bottom line. Itmar Hilchasa Lo Karav Kishmuel Velo Shmuel Velo Kabbalazar. So we'll say, so what is the halacha? Okay, so remember again, this is a very specific case of where the borrower predeceases the lender, right? And then the lender dies. So now the children of the lender want to collect from the children of the borrower. Can that happen? So Rabbi Lazar says, absolutely yes. It's not a problem. They could just take a regular Shevuos Hayarshim, just take a regular Shevuah of inheritors, right, or of orphans, saying that as far as we know, children of Yaakov say our father never received payment for this debt, and they could collect. Rav and Shmuel, they can't collect. Why not? Because again, since Father Yaakov was already obligated to go ahead and take a Shevuah, and that Shevuah cannot be passed down from father to son, therefore the debt remains uncollectible. So who does the halacha follow? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, so Amar Rav Chama, Hashtadol Itmar Hilchas Alo Krav Shmuel, Velo Krav Elazar. So therefore I will say, so Rav Chama says, look, the truth is, the Gemara doesn't really reach a decisive conclusion. Therefore, Haydaina da'avid keravu Shmuel avid, da'avid kerav Elazar avid. Interestingly enough, the Gemara says that halacha l'maisa, however the Beis Din paskins, they're good. They're good. Both legitimate approaches. Amra Papa, Haishtar diyasmi, lo mikra karina le, velo agbuye magbinan be. So we'll say this is very interesting. So Papa says, therefore, if you have this type of shtar, now literally again, shtar of the Yisomim, right? A shtar of orphans. Now again, remember, it's dafka this case, because they're both saying, remember again, everyone is agreeing that if the malva predeceases the lova, right? If the lender predeceases the borrower, that's fine. That's fine, because then again, the children of the lender could collect from the children of the borrower with what we call a typical Shevuos Hayarshin. That's not a problem. So it's only in this case where the lova predeceases the malva. So therefore, again, Rav Papa says this type of shtar, where the lova predeceased the malva. So the Gemara says, Lo mikra karina, we don't tear it up. But we don't immediately use it for collection either. Why? Agbuye lo magbinan be, dilma svira lon kiraf ushmuel. Maybe we hold like Rabbi Shmuel. So therefore, again, you can't go ahead and collect from it, because Rabbi Shmuel will say it's uncollectible. Umikra lo karinan be, but we also don't tear it up. Why? The haydaina the avid Rabbi Lazar avid, because at the end of the day, if a dayan passes like Rabbi Lazar, it works. And Rabbi says, I just want to point out this. Actually, let's see at the end of the Gemara. Hahu daina da'avid Rabbi Lazar. So I'll say there was a particular Beis Din and a dayan who passed like Rabbi Lazar, and therefore again allowed this type of shtar where the lova predeceased the malva, and then the malva died, allowed the yarshim of the malva of the lender to collect from the yarshim of the borrower with what we call a typical Shevuos Hayarshin, an oath where the kids say, we swear that as far as we know, our father never told us that this loan was repaid. So that's how Dayan did it. Havatzura b'Rabbanan b'Masya. So there was a young Talmid Chacham who was there in the city. Amar lei, Aisina igarta b'Ma'arava the Lesil Chasar Kabbalazar. So he said to this Dayan, I'm going to bring a letter from Eretz Yisrael that the halacha does not follow Rabbi Elazar and that you ruled incorrectly. Amarle, l'chitaisi. So again, so the Dayan said, all right, go for it. Go for it. Obviously, if you bring me the letter, I'll change my ruling, but bring me the letter. So the Gemara says, Asal kamed Rabbi Chama, Amarle haydaina da Avid Rabbi Elazar Avid. So he came from Rabbi Chama said, Rabbi Chama Paskin, look, we might not hold that Rabbi Elazar is the ideal approach, but if someone passes like Rabbi Elazar, ultimately, again, their psak halacha is binding. Incredible. So both say, and that is indeed how the Rambam himself paskins. The Rambam seems to indicate that ideally we pass like Rabbi Shmuel. And therefore, in this kind of case where we'll say, just remember the case, where the lova, the borrower, predeceases the malva, and therefore, again, Yaakov, the lender, was already chayiv to the children of the borrower of Zvulun a Shvuah. When Yaakov subsequently dies and now his children want to collect the debt, ideally we pass like Rabbi Shmuel, this is an uncollectible debt. Why? Because since lender was already chayiv a Shvuah, the Shvuah cannot be bequeathed to children, and therefore the debt remains uncollectible. If, however, the Beis Din ended up passing like Rabbi Elazar, and therefore had the children of the lender take a typical, what we call Shevuos HaYarshim, a regular inheritor's oath, which is, I swear that our father never told us that the debt was collected, then halacha l'maisa, the debt is collectible. So ideally, like Rabbi Shmuel, Bidi Eved, like Rabbi Elazar, and that is indeed how the Rambam paskins, quite amazing. Again, I will say, but to be clear, in the reverse case, right, where again the malva dies first, right, Yaakov the lender dies first, and then ultimately again borrower dies, everyone agrees that is a collectible debt, right? Because then, now again, remember, the yarshim of the malva have to take an oath to the yarshim of the lova, but that's a typical Shevuos HaYarshim, and everyone agrees that case will work. That's our Mishnah. Beautiful. Let's go back there. Velu Nishbain. So says, remember again, the Mishnah then launched into a discussion of a list of people who have to take a Shevuah, ultimately again, in order, now have to take a Shevuah even without a claim, right? So for example, sharecroppers, right? Who was on the whole list? I'm sorry. Who was it? Good. Right. Arisin, Shutfin, partners, Arisin, Apetropin, executors, Ishan, Asason, Sochabayis. Good. So it says the Gemara, I don't understand. What does this mean? Atu Bishuftani Askinan? Are we dealing with fools? Or what do you mean? Who's going to swear? Who's going to swear without a claim? Like, what does that mean? These people could be made to swear without a claim. To which the Gemara means, Ve'elu Nishpan, Shelo B'tainas Bari, Ela B'tainas Shema. Rather, what it means is as follows. In general, in order to go ahead and be chayiv a Shevuah, what do you need? A tainas bari. What's the definition of a tainas bari? What's tainas bari? Tainas bari means a definitive claim. A definitive claim. So halacha l'maisa, again, I'm claiming you owe me $1,000. You're claiming you only owe me $500. Definitive claim. In these cases, remember, let's say Ruvain's my partner. I can say, Ruvain, do me a favor. I want to make sure, let's keep this above board. You take a Shevuah that you're not taking anything more that you're entitled to. I don't have a specific claim against Ruvain, but halacha l'maisa, I could trigger a Shevuah. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Tana, Ben Bayis Sha'amru, and I will say, by the way, we'll see why that is in just a moment. Why can you impose such a Shevuah like this on your partner, on your sharecropper? Why are you allowed to do this? So we'll see. Tana, Ben Bayis Sha'amru, this will say, so this idea of a Ben Bayis, right? So again, remember in the Mishnah's case, it was Uben, right? Uben Habayis. So literally again, this is a son who is in my home, a son who runs my home. So who is this? So the Gemara says, very interesting. Tana ben Bayis Amru lo shenichnas v'yotzi b'raglav. It's not just simply a son who comes in and out of my house as he pleases. Ella machnis lo polim umotzi lo polim. Machnis lo peros umotzi lo peros. This is really someone who is running the affairs of my household. Right? So he's in charge of the produce. He's in charge of the employees. So why could I ask him to take a shvuah? My shnahani. What's different about all of these people? The Gemara says, Mishum Dimoro ba'atera. They justify taking more than they are entitled to. Now, why do they justify taking more than they're entitled to? Rashi says, Dimoro ba'atera li'atzmam lefi shetarchu b'nechasim. So now we get to the core of this. The common denominator amongst all of these people, the shutfin, the partners, the aris, and the sharecroppers, the ben abayis, is all of these people who are working for the benefit of the household. In general, again, I will say, when people feel that they're working and they're benefiting someone else, 9 out of 10 times people feel that they're giving more than they're getting. And therefore, again, people justify taking a little more extra. I'm not stealing, chas v'shalom. I'm not stealing. I'm really entitled to this. Again, so I'm just going to self-reward. I'm going to self-reward a little bit. So because of that, the Gemara says, in these kind of a partner in a business, right? That partner could feel, you know what, I'm giving more, I'm investing more, and I spend more time in the office, I'm out getting new clients, I'm doing more, my salary is only X, I feel I'm entitled to a little bit more. So it is, and again, I will say it's fascinating because it seems to be like it's almost like human nature to feel that we're always getting the short end of the stick, right? It's human nature to feel that I'm always entitled to more, that maybe people don't appreciate the efforts that I'm putting in. And therefore, again, if I'm not going to be recognized by the people around me, I'm going to recognize myself, so to speak. And therefore, again, the Shevuah is there in order to keep everyone honest. Incredible. I'm Rabbi Yosef Yomi. I'm Rabbi Nachman. V'hu sheyesh taina beinayhu shtei kesef. So Rabbi Yosef Yomi says, but again, all of this presupposes, actually very interesting, we've actually seen this before, that halacha l'maisa, there's a taina of at least shtei kesef. Look at Rashi just a moment. Sheyesh taina beinayhu shtei kesef. Shezeh tano shema kafta mishali shtei kesef. V'zeh modelo b'miktsas dekrovihi l'shvua da'araisa. Ela Shatainas Shemahi. So Rav Yosef's actually, he says about this, very interesting, he claims there has to be some general ballpark of a financial claim over here. And he says it has to be a taina of at least shtei kesef. Kiman, who is this like? Kiman Kishmuel. But 1 second, remember again, we had this machlokes before. In general, again, in the case of Modev Miktsas. So again, does the claim have to be shtei kesef? Does the kfira, not negation, but denial, have to be shtei kesef? So the Gemara says, but Rav Chia brought this down as a support to Rav. Ema kfiras taina karav. You're right, Rav. The Gemara says, say it's referring to the amount of the denial, like Rav. Okay, so Rav Yosef comes along and says, Rav Yosef explains or modifies this a little bit and says, there does have to be some element to meet on the bones with the claim. It can't just be out of nowhere. In other words, there does have to be some basic framework, some basic ballpark for a claim that I feel that maybe Reuven is taking a little bit too much from the partnership, the sharecropping agreement, so on and so forth. Good. And so therefore, I will say, the takeaway from that is, any case where people are working together in some level of partnership and both parties have ease of access to money, to merchandise, Chazal instituted that either party could trigger a Shevuah. Now again, when I say either party, that's in the case of Shutfin, right? That's in the case of partners. Let's say in the case of a sharecropper, if I'm the balabas, the sharecropper can't force me to take a Shevuah. In Shutfin, in partners, so either partner could trigger a Shevuah on the part of the other. By all the other cases, I could cause my employee to have to take a Shevuah, which we'll say is interesting because it's a fascinating bookend. Because remember, how did the Mishnah start? The Mishnah started on one hand by saying that an employee has tremendous power. How? That if he claims he didn't get paid, he can swear and get paid. Yet the end of the Mishnah highlights this idea of power of the employer, that the employer could go ahead and say, again, in specific cases, it's not any case of an employer, like in other words, it wouldn't work with an employer with a fixed wage, right? It's talking about employers who employ people who have percentage income, like sharecroppers, things like that. I can trigger a Shevuah, ultimately, again, in order to go ahead and make the person swear that they're not taking any more than they are entitled to. Incredible. Okay, so the Gemara says, however, this idea that the employer could force the sharecropper or the executor of the estate to go ahead and take a Shevuah is only when the employment is intact. Let's say the employment has been dissolved. After the fact, the employer cannot make the employee take a Shevuah. So the Gemara says something very interesting. So we'll say, remember again, the Mishnah said like this. Let's just play this out. So Reuven is my sharecropper. So now the Mishnah told me that halacha l'maisa said at any point during our sharecropping agreement, I can say, Reuven, I want you to take a Shevuah that you have not taken more than you are entitled to. Okay, fine. So fine. But once Reuven is no longer my sharecropper, I can't ask him to take a shvuah on when he was my sharecropper. However, if Reuven requires a shvuah to me from another area, so for example, let's say Reuven was my sharecropper. Sharecropping arrangement ended in Nisan, and then you know what happened in Sivan? In Sivan, I lent Reuven $1,000. The debt is due. I say, Reuven, you owe me $1,000. Reuven says, I only owe you $500. Oh, modev mixas. Reuven's chayav shvuah. Once Reuven's chayav shvuah there, then what could I do? We could do gilgul shvuah, right? We could go ahead. Remember again, what's gilgul shvuah? Gilgul shvuah says once you have to swear in one scenario, we could heap on other shvuahs that normally would have been untriggerable. So now the Gemara asks an interesting question. So the Gemara says, Ibailu ma legal gilgul derabanan. They both say, does gilgul shvuah apply only when the shvuah is d'oraisa, right? When, let's say again, the person taking the shvuah is taking a shvuah d'oraisa, or does it apply even with a shvuah d'rabanan? Right? So, for example, I both say, let's say again, Reuven was my employee, separate from the sharecropping. I owed him $1,000, or he claimed I owed him $1,000. I said I paid him. He said no, I didn't. What's the halacha? He takes a shvuah. What type of shvuah is that? That's a shvuah's hesis, a derabanan shvuah. So do we say once he's already taking a derabanan shvuah, I could add on other shvuahs like from when he was my sharecropper? Or do we say gilgul shvuah only works by d'oraisa shvuahs, but not by derabanan shvuahs? Fascinating. So Tashma, here we go. So lov heimenu erev shvius ulumatzei shvius nasalo shutaf o aris. So I'll say, listen to this. Let's say Reuven borrowed money from me erev shmita. Okay, and then after Shemitah, he became my partner or he became my sharecropper. Ein megalgalin. So the halacha is, we cannot go ahead and, now let's say again, he's going to go ahead and take a shvuah when he's my shutaf or he's my sharecropper. I can't go ahead and make him swear on the debt from before Shemitah as well. Now there's a good reason for that. Taima, the love himenu erev shvius, the asya shvius afkase. There's a good reason for that. Why? Because when did I lend the money? Erev Shemitah. What happens to debts over Shemitah? Ultimately, again, they're canceled. So because of that, there's nothing to swear about. However, again, what you can see from here is if he was taking, let's say, a shvuas shutfin, right, or a shvuas arisin, and it wasn't a Shemitah canceled loan, I would be able to make him swear about the loan. Now, both say, so what do you see from here? That even when someone is taking a shvuah d'rabanan, you could still do gilgul shvuah. To which Gemara says, lo tema hashashne shvuah megalgalin. So the Gemara says, Nas, rather, Gemara says, reframe the case as follows. Na'aselo shutaf o aris erev shvius, or lumatzi shvius lava himenu. Suppose let's reverse the case. Reuven became my partner, who became a sharecropper erev shmita, and on matzei shmita, he borrowed money from me, megalgalin. So ultimately, again, we could do a gilgul shua. So Gemara says, that's obvious. Habeheja katanila, na'aselo shutaf o aris erev shvius, or lumatzi shvius lava himenu, megalgalin. Shmamina, megalgal midrabanan shmamina. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that Allah Chalamaisa gilgul shvuah works whether it is a shvuah d'oraisa or it is a shvuah d'rabanan. Either way it works. So Allah and is proving it from this case because over here, Reuven is going to swear because he is my partner, because he is my sharecropper. And once he's swearing on that, I can make him swear regarding other outstanding loans. That oath of a partner or a sharecropper is a shvuah d'rabanan. So both say it's a very important piece of halacha. Therefore, we see the concept of gilgul shvuah applies whether or not the shvuah you are currently taking is d'oraisa or d'rabanan. Incredible. Amar Rafuna says as follows: top of Memtes, last daf of Meseches Shevuos. Say, wow, Shechiana v'kimana v'gyana lazman hazeh. Incredible. So Amar Rafuna, lekom megalgalin chutz mischir. So say the halacha is very interesting. You could do gilgul shvuah for anyone other than a hired worker. Rashi says over here, the kol megalgal in top Rashi amemtes al yidei kol shvuah d'rabanan megalgalin. So as we just mentioned before, you can go ahead and do gilgul shvuah for any type of shvuah, even a d'rabanan. Chutz me'al yad shvuas schir shein megalgalin alav al yadah shvuah acheres. So I'll say, remember again, what does this mean? This is the first shvuah in our Mishnah. I write, Reuven works for me. I write his wage is $1,000. So he comes to me and says, pay me. I say, Reuven, I paid you. Reuven says, no, you didn't. So what's the halacha? Reuven swears that he was not paid, and ultimately, again, I have to pay him. So the Gemara says something very interesting. You could do gilgul Shevuah on any type of Shevuah, right? Even a Drabanan Shevuah, except for that Shevuah, except for the Shevuah of payment of an employee. Why? Now Rashi points out over here, because since that Shevuah in and of itself is such a novelty, right, that the employee could swear and collect his payment, you can't start adding additional things onto that Shevuah. Rav Chisda says, La kol ein makilin, chutz mischir de makilin. So similarly again, Rav Chisda is not disagreeing. He's actually saying the same thing. Ultimately, again, for all other shuas, you can't be megal. In other words, that for all the shuas, you have to do gilgul shua, except for schir, where ultimately, again, we're megal, and we don't do gilgul. So the Gemara says, "My benayu, what's the difference between these two opinions? Ika benayu liftach lo." So both say this is very interesting. So halacha l'maisa again, when someone comes to this is very interesting. So again, I want to point out let's talk about everyone's agreeing. What do we have? What are our nuggets of information? Number one, you can do gilgul shvua whether the shvua being taken is da'araisa or drabanan. That's number one. Number two, everyone's also agreeing that there is one case where you can't do gilgul shvua, and that's shvuas schir. That is the shvua of an employee who claims that he did not get paid. So the halacha is he swears and then he gets paid. Once he's swearing, the employer cannot heap other shvuos on that. The logic seems to be that since that shvuah itself is such a novelty, you can't start adding additional stuff onto it. Fine. So Rabbi say both Rav Huna and Rav Chisda are agreeing on that. What's the machlokes? So this is very interesting. When someone comes to take a shvuah, do we encourage gilgul shvuah or not? That seems to be the machlokes ultimately again between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Rav Huna, who says la kol megalgalin, according to Rav Huna, when these parties show up in Beis Din encourages gilgul shvuah. They say to the claimant, is there anything else you'd like to put on this shvuah? And according to Rav Chisda, we don't encourage it. It's only if the claimant asks for it that ultimately we do it. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Vashiyas mishametas, and ultimately again, Shemitah goes ahead, and I will say the novelty in the Mishnah was that the Mishnah said that Shemitah goes ahead and negates a shvuah, or cancels a shvuah. So the Gemara says, where do you know that? Right there, both is fascinating. That Shemitah cancels any outstanding shvuahs. Where do you know this from? Minani Amrav Gidol, Amrav, Damakra, V'zeh Divar Hashmitah, Afilu Dibor Mishametas. Shemitah cancels even Dibor, even speech. Let's say, Hadrun Allah Kol Anishban. Let's go. Hineni Muchan Muzuman. Ultimately, again, for the last parak of Meseches Shevuos. Arba Shomrim Hein. There are 4 custodians. Here we go. Shomer Chinam, unpaid custodian. Shoel, borrower. No say schar, paid custodian. Socher, renter. Good. We'll say that those are our 4. Shomer Chinam, Shoel, what we call Shomer Sachar, and Socher. Incredible. Shomer Chinam. Now, by the way, why is this here? We'll see again, ultimately, it's not really here for this part, it's here for the second part. We're here to talk about the shvuah liabilities of these people. So Gemara says, here we go, Shomer Chinam, Nishpa ala kol. So Shomer Chinam, remember again, what is a Shomer Chinam chayiv for? Unpaid custodian, what is he chayiv for? For pshia, for negligence, which means that halacha l'maisa, he swears that he was not negligent, and with that oath, he exempts himself from all liability. Good. Shomer Chinam nishpa lakol. Shoel mishalim esakol. On the other hand, a borrower, right? So on the other end of the spectrum is a borrower, right? A borrower is liable for everything, right? Remember again, the only exemption that a shoel has is bailov imo, right? If ultimately, again, the owner is with him. Right, the owner is with him, but otherwise, for our purposes today, so shoel has complete liability. No say schar v'asocher. So again, a paid custodian, right, a shomer sachar and a socher and a renter. Nishbain ala shvuya, ala shvura, v'ala shvuya, v'ala mesa, u'mishalmin es aveda v'es agneva. So a socher and a shomer sachar, they're chayiv for gneva v'aveda, right? They're chayiv again if the object is lost or stolen. They are pater ultimately again for ones, for extenuating circumstances. Okay, so we'll say that's beautiful. That's all the introduction. Here's the meat of our sugya. Here we go. So the Gemara says as follows. Okay, so we'll say let's just give one little piece of introduction. Do you see Rashi no say schar v'hasocher? It's like the fourth Rashi in the Mishnah. So Rashi says over here, if you skip down a little bit in the Rashi, says, "Mishnah zos kvashnui basochar sapolin kol ki agavna." Well, now Rashi says over here. Now we already learned this Mishnah. Why is this here? So if you see that Rashi no says schar basochar, go into it 2, 4, 6, 8 lines in. Here it is. Ulefi shekarban hashvua dechiyuvi upturi toloi bekach shenishpa al davar shu mechuyav. Shemechuyev alav imhoda ubishvuasa pater atzmo mishali. I'm sorry, pater atzmo mishali. Nimtza shekofer mamon v'chayev carbon shvua sapikadon v'chomesh v'asham. So we'll say, here we go. When it comes to these shomrim, here's the way this works. If a shomer swears in order to exempt himself from liability, and when he swears, he is exempting himself. Let me say differently. Had he admitted liability, he would have been chayiv. If he attempts to take a shvua to go ahead and exempt himself from liability, he is chayiv the following thing. Number 1, for a false shvua sapikadon. Number 2, chomesh, right? Principal plus penalty fifth. And number 3, a carbon asham, right? So shvua is chayiv for a false shvua sapikadon. Ultimately, again, a chomesh and asham. That's if you swear falsely. But again, I will say it's swearing falsely in a way where the oath would save you from paying. Now, the chiddush of the Mishnah is, if a shomer swears falsely, but the false oath doesn't do anything to save him money, then interestingly enough, there's no liability. Now, there's liability for a false oath, but there's no asham, there's no chomesh. Rashi goes on, he says, but if he swears falsely for no reason, meaning, for example, let's say had he admitted his liability, he would not have been chayiv. Kigon shim hoda shlohayim mashalim eno chayiv carbon, so eno chayiv carbon shvua shelo kafro mamon. So also we're going to see examples of this. So if you lied, right, if you swore falsely, but even had you admitted, you would not have been liable. Halacha l'maisa, there is no carbonic liability in that case. Again, so halacha l'maisa, as a shomer, you have carbonic liability when your false oath saved you from paying money. Then you're chayiv shua sapikadon, asham, and chomesh. However, if you swore falsely, but had you admitted there would have been no financial liability anyway, ultimately, again, you have no carbonic liability. Incredible. So we'll say, now let's see this in the Mishnah. Here we go. For example, Amar lo shomer chinam, heichan shori. I deposited my shar with Reuven. Reuven is an unpaid custodian. So we'll say, what is an unpaid custodian chayiv for? What is he chayiv for? Pshia, only negligence, which means in any other case, he's not liable. And what happens? Amar lo mace. So Reuven lies, and he says, the animal died, but in reality, it didn't die. Really, the animal, again, it broke, right? It broke, well, so to speak, it broke, right? Or it was taken captive, or it was stolen, or it was lost, right? Or, for example, Reuven swears nishbar. He swears that it broke its leg, right? But in reality, so he's lying. Or nishba. The animal was really stolen, was taken captive. That's what he swore to. Or nignav, animal was really stolen, right? I'm sorry, he swore that it was stolen. Or avad, he swears that it was stolen. So again, I both say, so essentially in all of these cases, something happened to the animal, but Reuven's lying, right? So again, just a simple case. Say, Reuven, where's my animal? Reuven says, I'm so sorry, it was stolen. But in reality, it died. Now it died. I both say, so what happens? I say, Mashbiachani. I say, Reuven, do you swear that the animal was stolen? And Reuven says, yes. And then it turns out that what? Reuven was lying. The animal wasn't stolen, it died. What's the halacha? Pater. Now we'll say, when we say pater, why is Reuven pater? There's no carbonic liability. There's no asham, there's no chomesh, there's no shua. Why not? Why not? Because again, in this case, Reuven's oath was inconsequential. Even had Reuven told the truth, he still would have been pater. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, he's pater. Again, I both say, he still made a false oath, right? There's a shua shav over here, a shua shaker. But again, what it means is, in terms of shua sapikadon, ultimately, again, he's going to be pater. So there's no shua sapikadon, there's no asham, and there's no chomesh. I both say, you say to yourself, why would someone lie in such a situation like this? This makes absolutely no sense. So I'll say it's a good shaila, and I think it's one of those things that a lot of times in life we don't understand why people do the things that they do. To me, what I see in this is that sometimes we are so desperate to just escape liability or to escape responsibility that we'll do whatever we can to kind of create an escape hatch for ourselves. It's kind of like, I remember, it's kind of like, what happens when, you bump into someone, and, or what sometimes you see when people are involved in an accident, the first thing they say is, wasn't me, but maybe it was you, right? So it's like, it's human nature that the reflexive reaction is to absent one's self from responsibility. Whatever occurred, it was someone else. So again, which is really the antithesis of what it means to be a yid, because of what it means to be a yid, like we saw in Rabbi Shmuel Silber, what it means to be a yid ultimately is to take responsibility, is to be a bal achrayus, but human nature is to escape achrayus. Okay, Heichan Shori. So I say to Ruvain, now boss, this is the second case. I say to Ruvain, where's my ox? Amar lo ini odea. And he says, I don't know. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, ini odea matasach. And Ruvain says, I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, okay. So here I will say, Ruvain is saying, I don't even know what you're talking about. V'hu shemes on nishpa on nignav. Oh, avad. So again, in this case over here, Ruvain's denying that I even deposited with him an ox. Mashbi'acha ani. I say, Ruvain, do you swear? V'amar amen. And Ruvain says, amen. Pater. That was interestingly enough, pater. Now, why is he pater? Because again, remember, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, Ruvain, as long as there was no negligence involved, Ruvain would have never been chayiv. So even though he is swearing falsely, remember again, there is only liability for Shevuos HaPikadon when the oath would have saved you from a financial obligation. But when you would have been pater anyway, it makes no difference. Heichan Shori, where is my ox? Amar lo avad. Ruvain says it was lost. Mashbi'acha ani. I say, Ruvain, do you swear that it was lost? And he says, amen. So now the witnesses come along and they say, oh no, well, it is lost. It's lost in his stomach, right? It's lost in his stomach because he made a good barbecue, right? He made a good barbecue and invited all of his friends. He ate it. So I'll say, so now that's pshia. Now that's negligence, right? So now both say, so now what's talacha? So now both say, now it turns out that Ruvain has swore falsely in a way that saved him from paying money. Okay, so therefore again, mishalim esakaren. Ultimately again, he'll go ahead and he'll pay principal. Hold them atzmo. Now both say, now if Ruvain went ahead and admitted liability on his own, in that case, mishalim karen, chomesh va'asham. So interestingly enough, if you're made liable through witnesses, then you pay principal. If you admit on your own, that triggers then the full force of a Shevuos HaPikadon, and ultimately again I'll have to pay principal, chomesh, and asham. Heichan Shori, where is my ox? V'amar lo nignav. Ruvain says it was stolen. Mashbi'acha ani. I say, Ruvain, swear to me. Va'amar amen. Ruvain says, yes, I swear it was stolen. Va'idin me'idin also sheganvo. And ultimately again, witnesses claim that Ruvain stole it, right? So mishalim tashlumei kefel. Ultimately, again, he has to pay kefel because he's a ganav. Not only did he swear falsely, but he's a ganav. Hodalo miatzmo. What happens if Ruvain admitted his own liability? After swearing falsely, he admitted his own liability. Mishalim keren bechomesh va'asham. So what you see from here is that the full effect of a false Shevuos HaPikadon is ultimately unleashed after a case of admission. So Ruvain swears falsely, and then after swearing falsely, after he admits that he really misappropriated. So then again, it's liability for Shevuos HaPikadon, Keren, Chomesh, Asham. Amar le'echad b'shuk, heichan shori sheganafto. So I go over to Ruvain in the marketplace. So Ruvain, where is my ox that you stole from me? Who omer lo ganafti? Ruvain says, I never stole anything from you. Va'idin me'idin also shaganvo. And witnesses claim that he stole it. Okay, so it's a ganav. So that's a classic case of ganav, right? And therefore, again, he pays kefel. Tavach umachar mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. If it turns out that he slaughtered it and sold it, then it's 4 or 5 time penalty payment. Ra'idim shememash m'shinuban. So this is very interesting. What happens if I confront Ruvain and say, Ruvain, where is my ox that you stole? Right? And Ruvain says, I didn't steal anything. Then what happens? Ruvain sees witnesses coming close. So what does he do? He quickly admits it. Va'uban va'amar ganafti avalot tavachti umacharti. And he says, I stole it. but I did not go ahead and slaughter it and sell it. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Ein mashalim ela keren. Ultimately, again, he only pays principal. Now, both say that's because, remember, again, moda b'knas potter, right? Moda b'knas potter. Now, the novelty over here is you might have thought that since this is not really a pure admission, in other words, why is he admitting it? Why is he admitting it? Because he sees the witness is rapidly approaching. So perhaps we should not take such an admission into account. Halacha l'maisa, again, he only pays keren, which I will say, by the way, is a tremendous. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, "Ro edim shemashu shenoboin rabusa shmoina." There's a novelty here. The afagav de machmas piususa de edim odi v'chayiv atzmo bekeren keshorganaf. Defilu hachi havi hoda v'nifter min hakefel. So we'll say the idea over here is as follows. Now I want to point out. Let's say the witnesses come along and say he did slaughter and sell it. Let's say that's witnesses say he did, because remember he's admitting already that he stole it. He's just saying I didn't slaughter I didn't slaughter and sell it. Let's say witnesses come along and say he did slaughter and sell it. He's still potter from arba v'chamisha. Why? Listen to this. Why? Because since he admitted that he stole it, therefore what? He's exempt from kefel. Remember we saw this before. Once there's no kefel, there's no arba v'chamisha. Why not? Because arba v'chamisha is built on the back of kefel. So therefore, again, Rabbi will say, halacha l'maisa, once he admitted his liability, he's liable to keren, exempts himself from kefel, and even though witnesses come along and say, you slaughtered it and sold it, he's still pater. The chiddush over here is that even though his admission comes because he sees the witnesses coming, that's not a pure admission. That's not a pure admission. Nevertheless, halacha l'maisa works. So we'll say, what do you see from here? See from here that halacha l'maisa, even imperfect tshuva is tshuva, right? We are not purists when it comes to tshuva, right? Whatever we need to do to get a person on the right path, do it. Even though, again, Reuven's tshuva is less than sincere, his admission is only motivated because he realizes now he's choosing between the lesser of two evils. Either admit that you stole and label yourself a ganav, but exempt yourself from arba v'chamisha, or stand your ground that you're innocent and have to pay arba v'chamisha in just a few moments. So he chooses the better financial choice, which is admit that I stole, samaganav, I'm going to have to pay back the keren, but now I'm potter from kefel, because omod the knas potter, and I'm also going to be potter from arba v'chamisha. Imperfect tshuva is still tshuva. Incredible. Amar l'shoel, heichan shori. I go over, right, Reuven borrowed my ox. Hey, Reuven, where is my ox? Amar lo, so we'll say last amid of Maseches Shevuos. Wow. So we'll say, so again, very, very hard to believe that the journey is coming to an end. Very hard to believe. It feels like just 4 years ago we began Maseches Shevuos. So we'll say, so the Gemara says as follows. So Amar lo, right, so I go over to Reuven, right, Reuven borrowed my ox. I say, Reuven, where is my ox? So Amar lo, mace. Now I will say, now Reuven says it died. Now remember, I will say, what's the liability for a shoel? What's the liability for a shoel? Everything, right? Essentially, for our purpose, the shoel is chai for everything. Now Reuven claims it died, but it didn't die. He lied. Or he claims nishbar. He claims, right, that it broke a leg. Not really. Something else happened to it. Or nishba. He claims, right, nishba was taken captive. Or nignav. He claims that it was stolen. But that's not true either. He claims that it was lost. So we'll say, the point over here is Reuven is making a claim. And he's lying. I say, so right, so let's just go with the simple case, right? So again, Reuven's claiming it was lost. It wasn't lost, it really died. And I say, Mashbiachani, say, Reuven, do you swear that the animal was lost? The Amar Amen, and ultimately again, he says, Amen, what's the halacha? Potter. Now we'll say, now again, what's that? He's potter. Now what is he potter from? He's potter from Shevuos HaPikadon, Chomesh, and Asham. Why? Because his shvuah didn't change the math. Remember, the only time that there is Shevuos HaPikadon liability is when you swear in a way that is going to exempt you from payment. But if your oath didn't change your payment liability, so for example, in the case of a shoel, he's on the hook. He's on the hook regardless. So again, I both say, why is he swearing falsely? I don't know. I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe he feels bad about saying what really happened, but lamaisa, it doesn't matter. For our purposes, halacha lamaisa is going to be pater. Why? Because the shvuah didn't actually change his level of liability. Fascinating. On the other hand, heichan shori. I say, Reuven, where is my shar? Amar lo, ini yodea ma tasach. Now in this case, we'll say Reuven says, shar, what shar? What shar? Right? I don't know what you're talking about. You never deposited anything with me. But really, I did deposit it with Reuven, and something happened to the animal. And ultimately, again, I say to Reuven, I want to make you swear that halacha l'maisa again, that halacha l'maisa, you've never had the animal. Va'amar amen, and he says yes, chayiv. In that case, ultimately, again, there's liability. It's going to be liability in that case because remember, again, Abosai, by swearing that he never had possession of the animal, he's looking to exempt himself from complete liability. That's an oath in order to exempt you, to save you money. And halacha l'maisa again, then if he's chayiv for a false Shevuos hapikadon, Karen Chomesh Asham. Good. So Mar says as follows: Amar lenose schar vasocher heichan shoris. So we're just going through the cases. I go over to a renter and to a shomer sacher, a paid custodian. I say, Chevra, Reuven, where is my ox? Amar le mace. Also, we're just going to go through all the cases again. So remember again, what is a shomer sacher and the socher? What are they chayiv for? They're chayiv for geneva va'aveda. Right? So they're chayiv if the animal is lost or stolen. They're pater for ones. Right? Extenuating circumstances. No, the animal died. Right? Assuming there was no pshia. The animal died, or the animal was taken captive. In those cases, halacha l'maisa, they're going to be pater. So the Gemara says as follows: where is my ox? Amar mace. So again, they claim the animal died. But in reality, the animal broke a leg, or again, it was taken captive. Which I both say, by the way, doesn't change the math. Either way, they'd be pater for that. Or nishbar v'hu shemes on nishba, or nishba v'hu shemes on nishba. I will say first wide line nignav, or it was stolen. V'hu she'avad, or it was lost. Avad v'hu she'nignav, or it was right. They claim it was lost, but it was really stolen. Mashbiachani. In all these cases, I say, okay, Reuven, swear. V'omer amen, and Reuven says he swears. Rabbi say he's swearing falsely, but what? The oath doesn't change the math, right? In these cases, he would have been pater anyway had he said the truth. So therefore, again, pater. Again, I'm going to say, now again, keep saying it. We say pater, he's pater for Shevuos hapikadon. So there is no liability for Shevuos hapikadon, and for chomesh, and for asham. Of course, he's still swearing falsely. So there will be liability for a Shevuos shav, or for a Shevuos sheker. Mace, the Gemara's pater, mace, o nishbar, o nishba. So ultimately, again, if, for example, it died, or it broke a leg, broke a limb, right, or it was taken captive, right, but in reality it was stolen or lost, I make you swear, va'amar amen, chayiv. Ultimately, again, in that case, it'll be chayiv. Avad o nignav, v'hu shemes o nishbar. O nishba. So again, if halacha l'maisa, again, it was lost or stolen, but in reality, again, it died. O nishba, mashbiachani va'amar amen, pater. Zaklal. We'll say, here's the rule. Kol ha'mishana mechova l'chova, or miptur or liptur, or miptur l'chova, pater. So we'll say, here's the rule. Anytime you take a Shevuos hapikadon, and either, again, you're going from a state of where you were exempt to where you were exempt, or from liability to liability, or from exempt to liability. In other words, we'll say, here's the last knech. If you go ahead and you swear in a way that had you made your real claim, you would have been pater. But now, as a result of your actual claim, all right, of your stated claim, you're going to be chayiv. So in other words, you're taking on a heightened level of liability. Okay, there's no chiyuv for Shevuos hapikadon in that case because you've heightened your own liability. So in any case, again, where you would have been pater anyway, you would have been chayiv anyway, or you're upping your own personal level of liability from p'tur to chova, ultimately, again, pater. Right, pater. Ultimately, again, you're going to be pater. Right? Why? Because again, you're only chayiv for Shevuos hapikadon when the Shevuah saves you from payment. But if the Shevuah doesn't change the math, or the Shevuah enhances liability, then ultimately, again, there's no liability for the Shevuah. On the other hand, mechova leptur chayiv. But halacha l'maisa, again, I will say, if you swear in a way that exempts you from liability, that's when there is liability for the Shevuah. Again, I will say, so a very simple klal. The only time you're chayiv for Shevuos hapikadon is when by taking the Shevuah, you are seeking to exempt yourself ultimately again from liability. Good. The Gemara says, Zaklal, kol nishba lahakel al atzmo chayiv, lahachmir al atzmo pater. So the klal will say is anytime you're taking the Shevuah ultimately, again, to exempt yourself or to lessen the liability, you're going to be chayiv. But ultimately, again, if the shua either maintains the same level of liability or increases liability, you will be pater. Incredible. Right, the boss say, let's go. Man Tana Bar Shomrim, who is the Tana who holds that there are 4 custodians? Right, Mayor, it's right, Mayor. What does that mean? I don't understand. What does that mean? Who's the Tana who holds of 4 custodians? Everyone holds of that. Right? That's a concept in halacha. It's like who holds of Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Or is this 4 Shomrim? Man Tana Damra Socher Kinosei Sachar Dami. No, what it means, the boss say, if you notice, by the way, in the category of 4, 2 of them are lumped together, right? Shomer Sachar, paid custodian, and Socher and renter are put together. Who is that? Who holds of that? So Amra Baravua, Rabbi Meir he. That's Rabbi Meir that lumps them together. Rabbi Meir Ipcha Shaminale. Rabbi Meir said just the opposite. This none. Socher Ketzad Mishalem. How does a renter? What's the nature of a renter's liability? Rabbi Meir Omer Kishomer Chinam. Oh, Rabbi Meir says that a Shomer Sachar is like a Shomer Chinam. Rabbi Huda Omer Kinosei Sachar. Rabbi Huda is the one who says that no, that ultimately, again, a socher, a renter, is like a shomer sachar. Rabbi Baravua ibcha tani. So Rabbi Baravua ultimately, again, had the reverse. So the Gemara says, so therefore, if that's the case, so what we'll say, so interestingly enough, so what we're saying is that halacha l'maisa, that a socher, a renter, has the same din as a shomer sachar. If that's the case, hani arba havu shlosha havu. It's not really 4 custodians, it's really 3 custodians, because really what you have is Shomer Sachar, Shomer Chinam, unpaid custodian, Shoel, a borrower, and then Shomer Sachar and Socher are really the same. Now what it means is there's 4 categories of custodians, but they really only have 3 different categories of liability. So you have Shomer Chinam that has his category, Shoel that has his category, and then again Socher and Shomer Sachar, which have similar halachas of liability. Good. Amr li echad b'shok. Sorry. Heichan shori. Sorry. Amr li shomer chinam. Amr li shomer chinam. Heichan shori. Amr li echad b'shok. Amr li sochar. Heichan shori. Amr li ini yodea. Amr Rav. V'kulan p'turin mishvuas shomrim v'chayavin mishum shvuas bitoy. The boss said, interestingly enough, in all of these cases, take a look at Rashi. In all of these cases of the Mishnah, where we said that the individual is pater, pater means ultimately again what? Pater means they're pater from Shevuos HaShomrim, right? Shevuos HaPikadon. But ultimately again, they're chayiv in Shevuos Bitoy. Look at Rashi. So v'chayiv mishor Shevuos Bitoy. V'sha'avar carbon ola v'yored im shagag b'carbon kedin shvuo l'sha'avar ba'omer yodeani sheshvuos. So also, therefore again, what Rav is pointing out is interestingly enough, that in these cases of P'tur, you could be Pater ultimately again from Shevuos HaShomrim, which means what we call Shevuos HaPikadon. So there's no Asham, there's no Chomesh, there's no Keren, but it could be Chayiv ultimately again in Shevuos Bitoy. So the Gemara says, the Shmuel says, no, Af P'tur Mishum Shevuos Bitoy. You could even be Pater from Shevuos Bitoy. Now, I will say, what are they arguing about? Micah Miflagi, Shmuel Savar Lesel Belahaba. But Rav Savar Isibalav. So we'll say what they're arguing about is the fundamental machlokes that we had beforehand, which is what do you need in order to be chai for Shevuos Bitoy. So ultimately, again, I will say so ultimately, again, so Shmuel holds that in order to be chai for Shevuos Bitoy must be able to be phrased both in future tense and past tense. In this case over here, the Shevuah can only be phrased in the past tense, not the future tense. Therefore, there's no Shevuos Bitoy. Rav says you don't need a future past. Rather, what do you need? Positive and negative. And since the Shevuah can be phrased both in positive and negative, therefore, again, there is liability. The Gemara says, Vaha, vehein afligu b'chadazimna. But all right, we've already had this machlokes once before. The Itmar, Shvuah shezarak ploni tzor liyam, Shvuah shelo zarak. So we'll say, so again, halacha l'maisa, if again, I take a Shevuah, right? Shevuah shezarak ploni tzor liyam, Shvuah shelo zarak. I swear, I threw the stone into the sea. I swear that I didn't throw the stone into the sea. Rav Amar Chayiv. So Rav says you're Chayiv. Ushmuel Amar Pater. And Shmuel says that you're Pater. So we'll say, what's the nature of the machlokes? Rav Amar Chayiv the Isei B'la V'hein. Rav says you're Chayiv. Why? Because there's liability for Shevuos Bitoy as long as what? It can be phrased in the positive and negative. This can be phrased in the positive and negative, right? Shevuah, I threw the stone. I didn't throw the stone. Shmuel Amar Pater. Shmuel says you're Pater. Why? Delese B'haba. because you can't phrase this in the future. I swear I will throw this on. That doesn't work. So the Gemara says, so why do you have to go ahead and mention this twice? Utzricha. So the Gemara says, no, we have to bring this machlokes twice. Why? If we would have just said in this case, in this case over here, both say, I am choosing to swear of my own volition. Beidina meshbile, but again, in our case over here, Beis Din is adjuring the individual. Ema modile l'shmuel. Maybe Rav agrees with Shmuel in that kind of case. Ema modile l'shmuel b'd Rabbi Ami. Don Rabbi Ami, kol shvuas shadayana mashpin also ein chayovin Allah mishum shvuas bitui. Because again, Rabbi Ami holds that any time you're being adjured by a Beis Din, ultimately again, there's no shvuas bitui. Rabbi Ami holds there's only liability for a Shevuos bitui when halacha l'maisa, again, it is a self-proclaimed oath. V'yitmar baha, and if we would have just said our Mishnah's case, baha ka'amar Shmuel, that's in the case where Shmuel says this halacha, bahach ema modi le'lerav, or perhaps over here, ultimately he agrees with Rav about Shevuos bitui, therefore tzvicha, therefore halacha l'maisa, ultimately again, both cases are going to be needed. And Rabbi say, so halacha l'maisa, I just want to point out, the way we pass, this is what we mentioned before. In these cases, in the Mishnah, although you are potter from Shevuos HaPikadon or from Shevuos Shomrim, you are chayiv for Shevuos Bitui. You have made a false oath of utterance, right? You have made a false declarative oath, right? Or perhaps, depending on the circumstances, maybe Shevuos Sheker or maybe Shevuos Shav, depending on the circumstances. So again, just want to point out, even in all of the Mishnah's cases where the Mishnah says potter, you're potter from Shevuos HaPikadon. Right, that's what you're put from. So you're not going to be chayiv for Keren, Chomesh, and Asham. But there is other shvuah liability for making a false oath. Incredible. Gufa, Rabbi Ami, Kol Shvuah Shadayana Mashpin, also Ein Ba Mishum Shvuas Bitoy. The Gemara just picks up on this last detail. Interestingly enough, if you are adjured in a court, ultimately, again, you can't be liable for Shvuas Bitoy, a declarative oath. Why not? Shne'emar, O Nefesh, Kisi Shava Levate Bisfasayim. The pasuk says, if a person will articulate an oath with his lips, what do you see from here? Me'atzmo. There's only liability for a Shevuos Bitui if what? If you swear on your own. Ki d'reish lakish, ki mishtamish ba'arba lashonos. The word ki ultimately again has 4 different definitions. What are the 4 different definitions? If, Dilma perhaps, Ella, but, Daha, that. Okay, so therefore, again, I both say, so therefore, the lashon of O Nefesh, Ki Sishav Levate Sasai means, and this is actually very interesting, there's only liability for a Shevuos Bitui if halacha l'maisa you utter it of your own volition. But if you're adjured, there's no liability. Now, we don't pass in that way. And again, all of these things are tied together. If you make a Shevuos Bitui, whether you're adjured or you're not, it doesn't make a difference. If it's false, you're going to be liable. And that's why this ties into this sugya. That's why in this case is over here, even if you're not chai for Shevuos HaPikadon, right, you're part of Shevuos HaPikadon, you will be chai for Shevuos Bitui. Incredible. Rabbi Lazar says, "Kula p'ter mishvuas shomrim v'chayavin mishum shvuas bitui chutz me'enu yodea ma'atasach deshoel ugneva va'aveda denose schar v'shebesochar." So as I say, interestingly enough, so remember in all of this, the Gemara just said before, in all of these cases, even if you're part from shvuas shomrim, you will be chayiv for shvuas bitui, except for chutz me'enu yodea ma'atasach deshoel, except for the case of I don't know what you're talking about in the case of the shoel, right? And ultimately, again, in the case of Gneva Va'aveda, by no say schar and socher. Why? Shu chayiv sharikah from mammon. Because we'll say in those cases, you will be chayiv ultimately again for Shevuos HaPikadon. Now, what the Gemara is pointing out over here is, if you're chayiv for Shevuos HaPikadon, you're not chayiv for Shevuos Bitui, right? So again, you're not going to be chayiv for both of those things. So in those cases, you're going to be chayiv for Shevuos HaPikadon. Why? Shahari kaf from mammon. Because at the end of the day, in those cases, you did deny a monetary claim. And as he pointed out, when you denied a monetary claim, ultimately, again, you're chayiv for Shevuos HaPikadon. So both say, what's the takeaway over here? So really, all of this comes down to one simple principle. This last Mishnah in our Masechta, or this last parak, this paracle, right? This last parak over here in the Masechta teaches us a simple principle. We're introduced over here to what we call Shevuos HaPikadon or Shevuos HaShomrim, where halacha l'maisa, again, I've deposited an item with one of the four Shomrim. Who are the 4 Shomrim? Shomer Chinam, Shomer Sachar, Socher, Shoel. it's 4, but it's really collapsed into 3 categories because we paskin that socher and shomer sacha really have the same type of liability. There are distinctions, but that's not our Masechta right now. I come over to this shomer and halacha l'maisa, I want my object back. He claims something happened to it. Now, obviously, if I trust him, there's no shvuah. We're talking about cases where what? I would like some verification of his claim. He swears something happened to it, and it turns out that what? He's lying. Is there liability? What does it depend on? It all comes down to one simple thing. Did his false oath save him from financial responsibility or not? If it did, then halacha l'maisa, again, he is chayiv. Chayiv for Shevuos HaShomrim, right? Or Shevuos HaBichon. What is he chayiv for? Again, keren, principle, chomesh, additional fifth, and ultimately karban asham. Karban asham, good, that's his liability. If he made a false oath, but it turns out that the false oath didn't save him any money, it didn't do anything for him financially, then what? He is pater. But it turns out that when we say he's pater on Shevuos Shomrim. But what is he chayiv for? Ultimately, again, Shevuos Bitui. Rabbi say that's the sugya in its entirety. Rabbi say, as we come to the end, we did it. As it comes to the end of Masechta Shevuos, so first of all, a tremendous shkayach for us. You might say to yourself, well, maybe I don't feel so accomplished. I don't know. I hope no one ever asks me a question on Masechta Shevuos. Like, can you imagine you run into someone today, oh, I heard you just finished the Masechta. Tell me, I have a shayla on Daf Chaf days. Can you answer? I'll be like, I'll say, okay, you're right. We're not getting smicha Masechta Shevuos, right? And perhaps I don't even feel like I mastered. I will say, but sometimes it's not about mastery. It's about having the courage, the resolve, and the commitment to make it through the journey. And I will say that is what we have done. We have navigated through a very complex sugya, To be honest, at times like today, not giving the proper amount of time. A daf like this really required, well, it was really not a daf, it was a daf and a half. I don't want to brag, whatever, it was daf and a half, right? It was daf and a half. So I'll say, so Lamaisa, this required 2 hours. Okay, we're limited in time. I can't start at 4:30 in the morning. And I'll say, but we did it. And we did something that for many of us probably we never thought we would do. And even for those who thought it would be possible, it would have been so easy to give up at so many different points in this journey. But we did it. Shechiyanu, Vikimanu, Vigyarna Lazman Hazeh. We got to the end of this particular Masechta. And I will say a tremendous and overwhelming and beautiful and magnificent accomplishment. The Ribono Shalom saw how many times we struggled, but we kept going through. That's the avoda of the Yid, that's the avoda of the Daf, and I will say a tremendous and beautiful and holy accomplishment for us all. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should Emir Hashem see the struggle, the amount of effort that we put in, Emir Hashem, it should be a schus for Klal Yisrael, should be a schus for ourselves, it should be a schus for our mishpachas. And I will say tomorrow morning, B'Sha'at Tova U'Mitzlachas, we begin Meseches Avodah Zarah. The journey continues, the adventure continues, and halavai for many more years together. Hadron Allah, Arba Shomim, Uslikala Meseches Shevuos Rabosai, Mazel Tov. All right, Chevron Zoom, Mazel Tov, everyone, and Meretz Hashem. We should be zocha to many accomplishments together. We should be zocha Meretz to our Chevron Eretz Yisrael. Dina, so nice to see you. We should be zocha Meretz Hashem, our Chevron Eretz Yisrael. Should be zocha Meretz Hashem to Shmir Yisera, to Besoros Tovos, and Halavai, to incredible bracha for all of Klal Yisrael.